Hey, this is David. So I just passed by a car, a Prius actually, that had a bumper sticker saying, Al-Qaeda hates this car. So I've seen that bumper sticker before on other Priuses. And it's an interesting sort of claim. So think about it. Would Al-Qaeda hate a particular car? That is, would it hate one particular Prius that's parked on Rangsdorf Avenue in Mountain View, California? Not very likely. So that the person who has that bumper sticker on their car is probably trying to imply that Al-Qaeda hates all Priuses, and by extension that Al-Qaeda would hate all gasoline efficient cars. And so as I think about it though, that just doesn't make any sense. So I think what they're trying to suggest is that because buying oil requires sending a lot of money outside of the US, primarily to OPEC, and that Saudi Arabia has a lot of the world's oil, and that Al-Qaeda is largely a Saudi Arabia front, it would appear. I mean, most of the people who were involved with starting Al-Qaeda were Saudi Arabians. Right? You know, the identities of the 911, September 11th attackers, all those people were from Saudi Arabia. So explain to me why we invaded Iraq, why we invaded Afghanistan when it was Saudis who are in charge of Al-Qaeda, right? I mean, that's the kind of thinking that's going on, I believe, behind that bumper sticker, is that the problem here is of energy security, that whenever you buy gasoline, it causes money to be sent to Saudi Arabia, and that Saudi Arabia turns around and uses that money to fund Al-Qaeda. And that I'm going out on a limb, but I'm guessing that they're thinking that if Al-Qaeda sees a decrease in funds, that is, if there's a widespread use of fuel-efficient cars, then Al-Qaeda would see a decrease of funds. Or rather, there would be a decrease of oil being bought, which then turns into a decrease of money going to Al-Qaeda. I think that that's maybe what they're thinking. But that doesn't really make any sense. I mean, I think that the real reason that Al-Qaeda exists is because the Western powers are having to meddle politically with the Middle East. That is, the rhetoric they've been saying is that, the Americans are occupying the Holy Land, their Holy Land, which is Saudi Arabia. Okay, that occupation of Saudi Arabia is the presence of troops that began when the first Iraq War occurred, and Iraq was threatening to invade Saudi Arabia, and U.S. troops were sent to Saudi Arabia to provide some security and also invade invade Kuwait. Okay. So there's a certain amount of meddling that the U.S. has been doing in the Middle East for a long time, and not just the U.S. but other Western powers. There we go. So I said there's been a certain amount of meddling that the U.S. and other Western powers have been doing in the Middle East for decades. And I would imagine that the people in the Middle East, they're not happy with the Western powers because of that meddling. And that they would like to see us stop meddling in the Middle East. So they actually might like if we were to adopt fuel-efficient cars, because having fuel-efficient cars would decrease the amount of meddling that we need to do in the Middle East. I mean, the real problem here is one of fuel supply. So the U.S. used to have a large advantage in fossil fuel resources. We used to be producing every amount of oil that we needed, and we used to be exporting oil to the rest of the world. But our U.S. oil supplies began declining in 1970. And since 1970, the percentage of fuel that the U.S. has been importing from other countries has increased to where now it's 70%. So, 70% of the oil is being used for, and it's primarily being used for transportation, for cars, trucks, and etc. 70% of that is coming from outside the U.S., a large portion of which is coming from OPEC countries. So, that's a really serious energy security problem that really puts the U.S. at serious risk of being controlled by these foreign powers that we're buying our oil from, because they could tell us, like they did in the 70s, we'll cut off your oil supply. And as we saw in the 70s, cutting off the oil supply causes panic and causes havoc. Now, in the 70s, when that happened, our import rate was 35%. Today it's 70%. Just think of what would happen to our country if the oil supply would be cut off. That gives the U.S. and other Western powers rationale for meddling in the Middle East to guarantee the oil supply. But I think it's obviously causing a negative reaction among the people of the Middle East, and which is causing the unfriendliness that they have towards us. And that what would be the best is for us to decrease the amount of oil that we use by using more efficient transportation systems. And I think that Al-Qaeda would love for us to do that, because what Al-Qaeda is pushing for is for us to stop meddling in the Middle East. So the best way for us to stop doing that is to stop having to do that, which would be to decrease our oil importation needs. And the only way to do that is to switch to a different transportation system that doesn't require oil. So I think that bumper sticker is full of it and confused.